find this fun and interactive. I tried to do a lot of audience participation. So I know a couple of you said you have kids running around and might not be able to do that. That's totally fine. But for the people who are on camera and here, and able to participate, I'm excited for that. I was here last week, but last month, but I didn't say much. So I'll introduce myself formally. I'm Barb. I'm the president of Boxplot Analytics, a statistical consulting firm out of Philadelphia. I do have a bachelor's in statistics, so I've always liked math. I've just always kind of been a math person. I do have years of industry experience. I actually did consulting before I started my own firm. And just generally, I like being outdoors and gardening and doing kind of outdoorsy stuff. I will talk really briefly about what Boxplot does, but then I promise I'm going to shift it to manufacturing and how, data analytics in general, and like getting us all a better understanding of data analytics. But like I said, we are a data analytics consulting firm, and generally we help organizations use their data to make smarter, data-driven decisions. So typical things that we do are listed here: reports and dashboards, surveys, data cleaning and automation, data science, pretty much anything data related. The biggest confusion that I have with people, and it's not very common, but sometimes people will say, well, are you an app developer? Do you do websites? No, we're not software developers. It is purely data analytics, data movement, data clean, anything data related, but not software development. And we are a certified women-owned business. Okay, so I'm going to go over, like I said, the brief agenda for today, and I don't think it'll take up the whole hour. We'll see. But why is data analytics important to manufacturing? Where is that valuable data? How do you start collecting and using the data? And then just general analytics basics, because I think there are some people here who are also not necessarily specific to manufacturing, and we can talk about pitfalls and things that go wrong and all that fun stuff. Alrighty, so I want to start with why data. Does somebody want to call out and take some guesses? Why would manufacturers need data analytics at all? You don't have to raise your hand, just call out.
We hosted an entire event on how companies or brands can use different technologies to predict consumer behaviors based on data analytics. So there's many sources of data that they can collect to actually predict what consumers don't even imagine that they want.
Right.
In real time, and then produce accordingly. Also, understand where those consumers may be interested in acquiring those services or products. Even like for real estate agents, what are the best locations for certain businesses, things of the such.
Yeah, consumer analytics, consumer demographics. I would almost even kind of lump that into marketing a little bit, right? Of like, who are your clients? What do they want? How do you get them into the right buckets to get them what they want or what they don't even know that they want? Yeah, that's great. That's a good one.
I'd say 4 reasons.
Okay.
1 would be regulatory compliance.
Okay.
2 would be quality assurance. 3 would be productivity and lean manufacturing, productivity enhancing, and 4 would be managing your inventory and supply chain.
Oh, yes, those are all really good. I actually didn't have one of them written down. So I didn't have the regulatory one. That's a great one. I do have the others. Anybody else before I show you what I came up with? No? Alrighty. Well, yeah, I think that you guys hit it on the head, the people that answered, and I didn't have too much other than the product quality, less risk perhaps, detection of issues. I mean, you guys said a lot of these things in different forms. The customers and who are your customers. I actually don't have that. Oh no, I do have that there. There it is. Maximizing efficiencies, and I didn't even think of the regulatory one, but yeah, that's probably a big one that if you have to report in some capacity to different agencies or organizations, that makes a ton of sense. Great. Okay, so we've established now a bunch of reasons why manufacturers need data analytics and to be looking at their data. Where is that data? Some of you might already know this, and I do have some polls that Joe has graciously agreed to add ahead of time. It was a lot of work. Thank you, Joe. And I'm going to give you my, snapshot here, and then I'd love to hear if any of you know that you have these in your organizations or have clients or even somebody else that has them. So a lot of data comes from existing systems that a company has, like CRMs, Salesforce, HubSpot, whatever. Bookkeeping, you might think QuickBooks, Zoho, marketing, social media, MailChimp, if you have an email list or whatever email host you're using. These are obviously just examples. most larger organizations will start to have HR platforms, sales platforms, maybe even customer support. Like if you get enough emails, you have to start a ticketing system. There's so many different platforms that this data can come from. This is typically where it's coming from. Sometimes we'll have people that say, oh, I want to go pull data from a government source or something like that. That's fine too. We do that as well. But this is primarily where most organizations get their data. So I'd love to hear, and Joe, this is Zoom poll number 1. If you could check off what you know your organization has, or if you are not part of an organization or not, want to speak for a client or something like that, you or somebody you know, what do they have already? And we'll see kind of what comes up as the most popular answers. Are you guys able to access the poll? Is it available?
Launched it. I'm just, oh, there we go.
Okay. I think it made me submit one as well. And Joe, I think it should notify you when it's done, or maybe you just.
Yeah, I think we're the only 2 that haven't voted yet, so.
Okay, good. You can close it. Yep, go ahead. And I guess can we share the results out? Can we share them? Great. Alrighty, let's see. Wow, so accounting system came up as number that, and that makes sense, right? Most organizations should have some kind of accounting system. Oh, more people than expected know that they have an HR system. Okay, great. CRM, yeah, that's a big one. Oh, and more people than I expected said they had a ticketing or help desk system. Okay, great. Does anybody want to kind of disclose, like what exact platforms you have or that your clients or whoever use?
We use QuickBooks for like basically, I mean, all of our stuff and then all of our client stuff as well.
Yeah.
And then for our HR system, it's through ADP. So
they're a big one too. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, cool. Anybody else? Yeah. Those are great examples though, even by themselves. I mean, we've pulled from data from both of those. Almost every modern platform now has a way of pulling data. I think I even have that in here. It explains kind of how we do it. It's through an API. If you haven't heard that phrase before, it's basically like that company has a server and you get all your data just automatically pulled from their server. It's the best way of doing it, but we'll talk about that. So the point here is you can't ask too many questions about the numbers. You can't have enough data. There's no such thing, in my opinion, as too much data. We live in a world of data now. You've probably even heard people say it's the most valuable resource. And the joke is it used to be like oil or whatever, and now it's data. These giant companies like Facebook and Google make their millions on billions on data. So you can really do so much, and you can really quantify anything and everything. I mean, these are just some simple examples, not all necessarily related to manufacturing, but like how many calls does your business get a day, and how many of product X are sold each day, and which day of the week is busiest, and pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, how many customers do you see in person each day? You can ask all these questions, and then you can start to form experiments or kind of think, well, what if I did this differently? Could I increase my profits? Could I cut some costs? And how can I fix it? So super valuable to have all that data. So how do you get it then, right? That's the next question is, okay, we know where it is, but it's usually kind of trapped in there, right? You do have typically 2 options, and usually you can either go in and like download CSV files, or some of these platforms will have their own like mini analytics stuff built in, but the larger an organization gets, especially, is not enough. Like they hit a brick wall, they realize I'm trying to get other answers out of this, or I want to combine this data source with some other data source. And like you can't do it all in one with point and click. You need something a little bit more robust. Really, I won't read this whole slide to you, but I'll send out the deck afterwards so you can review it if you want to. The gold standard is to get the raw data. You want the raw data as it comes in, as it's generated from these platforms, which again is usually accessed via an API. And you want to pull that in, and that's what you want to collect together into a centralized location so that you can do all the analyses that you want to do on it, including, like I said, combining it with different programs. Like what if you want your turnover cost? You might need to combine the financial data with the HR data to get that. It might not come just from the HR data alone. You see what I'm saying? So it's really good to have the raw data. If you're a really tiny company, and I doubt anyone here represents that, but stop me if I do, you can start out with Excel files. And that's what most people do. And it works fine up to a point. Once you get larger though, you really need to, I mean, the gold standard is to move to a SQL database of some sort. So a centralized database that holds all of your data from all these different places in one place where anyone can access it, and you can control permissions for who can access it within the company. And then if you're a huge, massive company, and maybe even larger than 50 employees, I mean, really big company with a lot of data, you might use even more robust systems to access the data. It's still going to be data, but you might need to like change how you're accessing it and deal with that. Like think about a company like Netflix or Facebook, where they have like more data that we can even fathom on what people are watching and who their customers are and all that. It's a lot. Alrighty, so I'd love to hear once again from you guys. Zoom poll number 2. Where is your company or department, or again, someone you know, where are they storing data currently? If you're either not storing it, Excel files, a SQL database, somewhere else, I don't know, is also an option.
I launched the polling, so.
Yep, got it. Thanks, Joe.
Barb, what exactly is an SQL database?
Oh, yes, great question. So you could think of a database. Well, let me back up a second. Do you all remember those big CPUs for like desktop computers? Picture that. That's a server, right? That's like a box. And Google, Amazon, and any company can do this, but usually it's Google and Amazon. They have warehouses of these boxes that just sit and run all day. There's no monitor, there's no keyboard, there's no mouse. They just sit, and the whole job of that box is to stay online 24/7 and store your data so that at any point your company can access the data. So a database, you can have multiple databases within a server. It's not, a database isn't really a physical object in the box. It's just a way of organizing the different people in the box, because usually if you're buying space from Google or Amazon, you're sharing that with other companies. You're not doing your own. Now, any company can set up their own servers. My husband works at a company where they literally have their own server sitting in the office. Like he can point at it and touch it, and that's their whole thing. A lot more work to do it yourself and have the box sitting there. Like you have to maintain it. If it goes down, it's your own fault. You know, you need a backup generator, God forbid, if it like wipes your data. So most people will just pay someone like Google or Amazon to do it. But the databases then sit on the server, and yeah, you can have multiple tables of data in those databases, and it's literally just like a kind of a bucket of storage for all of your company's data they look like Excel files, actually. The tables, like picture an Excel sheet, but you can't interact with it like Excel. You kind of interact with it differently, so that you interact with it with a language called SQL to get at that data, but it's much more efficient than Excel. Oh, wow. So, okay. So speaking of Excel, most of you.
I just want to add something though.
Sure.
And you kind of hit it at the end. A SQL is a language that lets you do queries into all the data if you have specific, like Barbara says, specific questions.
Right.
So you learn it like anything else. Oracle is a database. They use their own type of SQL. So there's different type of SQL languages.
That's right. Yep. There's a lot of.
But it's a way to run a query into a data.
Yeah, into your data that's just literally sitting there, waiting for you to access it. Great. So yeah, a lot of you said Excel files were the majority, and yeah, it's I still find it somewhat surprising, but we get calls like this all the time of people who are storing their data in Excel files, sometimes dozens or hundreds of Excel files, and they kind of realize they're ready to move on to the next step of, okay, this is getting inefficient or hard to control. And the SQL database, like I said, it just sits there and holds everything in one place and can hold much larger amounts of information and is more efficient to query or get information out of. It's much better. Great. All right. Thank you all for answering that. And you get the point. I just said it. Yes, most people are not doing this. And it is expensive to not look into data analytics. I mean, you have people who kind of run their businesses in a certain way, assume everything is going well, but if they had just looked into the data earlier, they might have saved a lot of money or increased profits by a whole bunch. That's usually what the goal is, right? Saving money or increasing profits. So data is really important. So what are the challenges of analysis? So now we've got our setup, right? You know where the data is. In theory, in this example, we've brought the data into the proper place. We've collected it. We've stored it properly. What happens next? Well, it's hard. It's all kinds of problems. Even after people have the data in the place that they want it, they'll say to me, I hear these all the time. It takes me weeks to solve something in Excel. I don't know what chart I should use. We have a data team. They don't have time for me. And it's not my job. I got an answer, but I don't know that my answer is correct. Just because Excel or Tableau or some program gives you an answer doesn't mean it's the right answer. My client is asking for a report. I don't know how to generate one. There's all kinds of issues that appear after you actually have the data as well. And some of them you don't even know might be happening. So before I tell you about what I think are the most common ones, and no poll necessary, if you guys just want to use the chat, or preferably call out over microphone would be better in my opinion. Has anybody here faced analytics challenges that they're willing to share? We won't shame you.
Yeah, the biggest one I have is combining the data warehouses of different metrics. So for us, my Google Analytics dashboard does not feed into the bid and auction metrics, that we have sitting in Tableau.
Ah, I see. Okay, so you don't have the data stored in a central like SQL database or warehouse. It's multiple warehouses.
Correct.
Ah, okay, interesting. And you're having trouble kind of getting them to merge. Yeah.
Yes.
I think you would need a key that matches between the multiple data sets. You said it's Google Analytics data versus bid data?
Yeah, so we run a auction startup, it's a marketplace house. So, the items in that auction, the number of units, the amount of time up on the site, the category it's in, all those things don't correlate specifically to, what would be a conversion search information of what products people are actually looking for.
Yeah, that is stuff. So you're trying to kind of match it with what are people searching for and getting to your website for versus what you're actually, I don't want to say selling, I guess, but like bidding or.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that is tough. You'd probably have to do some cleaning on that, I would say, to get, it's got to match somehow, right? Something has to match.
Yeah, exactly.
Merge the data set. So, and it might be just like a bunch of if statements where you say, all right, if this is this search phrase or contains this word, categorize it as this product and take like, best guess. It might be what you have to do. That's a good one. Anybody else?
Yeah, not a personal analytics problem, but something, I'm going to I'm going to be the voice of the manufacturers here on something that I experienced when I worked for Johnson & Johnson. I was an electrical engineer on the manufacturing floor. And one of the things, I had this revelation of why were they always coming to me with broken machines on Wednesday or Thursday mornings? Why did machines always break Tuesday nights and Wednesday nights? Because it was 24/7 it ran. I had a theory on that. My theory was that's when really people started to buckle down and actually worked. They were over the weekend, but they wanted to get all their quota done before Friday when the weekend started. So I think it was just effort. The more effort was put in, the more things broke.
Okay.
I say a little tongue in cheek, but my point is we never realized we didn't know what we didn't know, and we didn't know what to collect and what data to collect that could be useful. Now, this was back in 2003, so different, almost very different, 17 years ago, but we didn't know what to collect, so we only ended up collecting things that the FDA made us collect on. So I think that there needs to be, so I guess the data analytics problem is how do you socialize people that they should collect all sorts of data and look at it?
Yeah, definitely. So what you're saying, you didn't know what to collect in order to test that theory or to figure out.
Well, I think broad, yeah, both my experience, I think broader, we didn't know what to collect or what we should be collecting for data.
I'm curious for manufacturing people specifically, do you get data from the machines? Do the machines
absolutely now more than ever? I mean, it also depends on the plant and whatever, but technically you can. You have these things called PLCs. I mean, programmable logic controllers that have become more, and SCADA is another industrial control that's very popular, like with offshore wind in the utility industry. But all those things, they've gotten more and more sophisticated, more and more networked, and more with the ability to collect data. When I was at Johnson & Johnson, it was more of a manual collection process by the users because we were using older PLCs, but we'd punch it all into a terminal that would go to an Oracle database for quality and regulatory purposes. But technically now today, short answer is yes, machines, you can collect a lot of data off of machines.
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, the machines just sound like the number one valuable source, not just for your hypothesis, but for a lot of stuff. And then timesheets. We get a lot of calls in the manufacturing space about timesheets and looking into like who's working when, and a lot of managers have to, I think, report that to even more senior level managers. So yeah, those two particularly seem like good ones. But yeah, thank you for sharing. That's great. Anybody else before we keep going? Those were both great though. Thank you. So, and we talked about this, I think, with the first example. Dirty data, I think, is really it's the majority of what you're going to have to deal with and the problem. And the other problem sometimes is people don't realize this is a problem, and they're hitting a wall, hitting an error over and over, and they get really frustrated. And I feel for them because they don't know that it's something in the data that's actually causing the problem. They go straight to the analysis, or maybe they think they did enough cleaning, and it's hardly ever enough. Sometimes you're cleaning throughout the whole process. It really is sometimes up to 75% of the work is just the data cleaning, merging, extracting dates, handling nulls and blanks, converting data types. Like, it all takes so much effort to get it into the right place that you can do the analysis. And this is where it gets so tricky too, where people might not realize that something's going wrong. Like, it's really easy to kind of say, oh, I don't know what chart to make, or this chart looks terrible. But it's harder to say, chart's not even appearing and I don't know why. And, like these kind of deeper issues where people kind of don't realize, oh, I just had to convert something. So dirty data is definitely, I think, the top analytics challenge. For manufacturing specifically, I would say proper design of experiments is a really big one. I mean, I gave a non-manufacturing example here too, like just changing the words my employees use to greet customers or answer the phone results in increased sales. It's a simple example, but it might be interesting to know if you're an established business, what can you do to boost sales? But for manufacturing, I think of, like, again, assembly line stuff, and is this machine significantly worse than this other one, or timesheet stuff, like all that can be really good with designing experiments, but they're challenging too. Like, you have to get a baseline. People sometimes often forget that, and then they have nothing to compare it to. You have to set it up properly so it's not biased in any way. And then you have to calculate the result the correct way too, which itself is also difficult. I mean, there's so many different hypothesis tests. Picking the right hypothesis test is often a challenge for people. So I would say this is a big one for manufacturing. Does anybody want to take a guess? What might be the problem? And this is a manufacturing specific thing. If I send one of my employees to randomly choose products from my assembly line for testing, I say, go down to the floor and pick out some products, and then we're going to test them and see if there's a problem. Just call out over microphone.
It won't be random
Yes, why not?
because they may be biased in how they pick it out, and also with the sampling they're using, it may not be it may be a bad sampling.
It's so true. Yeah, you can't just have somebody go and oops, sorry, next one. Pick out stuff on an assembly line. You really need to use like a random number generator or some kind of systematic approach, because every human on earth is even inherently biased. They don't even realize it. Like, even if they think, oh, I'm closing my eyes, I'm picking this, it's still, believe it or not considered a proper experiment. So yeah, good one, Joe. Great. Surveys are also a big one too. And I don't know how much people in the manufacturing sector do surveys. I'd love to hear from all of you if you guys, do any surveys at your organizations. But we'll answer this first. What might be wrong with putting a question like this on a survey?
It basically has two questions.
Yeah, exactly. If the person says no, is it, do you not have access, or do you not have knowledge? Because those are two separate problems that need to be dealt with in totally different ways. And I this actually came across our desk once. We had somebody hire us, and I did change the question a little bit so I didn't kind of make it obvious what happened or who it was. But they had this question on the survey. They came to us after they sent out the survey, and they're like, well, can we figure out like which one it is? I'm like, no, the way you worded it, unfortunately, we cannot. It's too late. Once it goes out, you can't fix it. These should have been two separate questions, or at least it formed a different way. So surveys can be tough too, in that people put leading questions on them, which again are biased. People don't have a complete set of choices. Like they'll often forget other, I don't know, or sometimes they just won't even put negative choices in there at all if they want a positive answer. You have to get the proper sample size for surveys. Surveys can also be their own difficulty. Does anybody do surveys in your organization? Either of employees or customers or somebody else?
Yep.
Yes, okay, we got one yes. Okay, great. Yeah, I don't know how to.
Yeah, we do too.
You do too, okay. I know Devin's not in manufacturing, but the other person that said yes, are you in manufacturing?
Not really.
Not really. Okay. I'm curious if the manufacturing sector does a lot of service. I think they're an overlooked tool. I really do. I think that they're a super valuable way of getting information, and people just kind of forget that they're there, and a really good way to use it.
To answer your question, Barb, with manufacturing, there are more, those surveys maybe more to comply with different regulations,
Yeah.
or like when you're doing not an I guess the term is investigation, or you're doing a review, you use surveys. So in that respect, yeah, but it's not like what we think of like a customer satisfaction survey or something like that.
Yeah, those are great though, especially the customer ones. I think they're like top surveys that people are missing out on for good ones, or client, whatever they're in. Okay, great. And then finally, once you get all the data together, and this is usually towards the end of the process, you've got to visualize it and then interpret the visualizations. Now, some things you don't have to visualize, but the human brain doesn't interpret tables of numbers well. So you really should be visualizing if you can. Someone can interpret a bar chart, a pie chart, whatever, way faster and with more accuracy than they can if you put a table of numbers in front of them. But of course, these have their own pitfalls as well. Best case scenario, if you do all of your visualizations fine, things could, I'm sorry, if you mess up the visualizations, the best case scenario is things stay the same and nothing changes for your business, but you didn't really get any value. The worst case scenario is you take some kind of action that hurts your business. And I want to show some examples of poor visualizations that can be misleading and create problems. Does anybody have a guess as to what is wrong with this chart? This is a tough one, so don't feel bad if I say no.
We're not really sure what we're measuring on the left-hand side on the y-axis. That's one thing.
Yes. Okay. So the Y is not labeled or labeled poorly. That's a good one. I'm going for something else, but it's close to that.
Scaling is bad too.
The scale. That's right. Look at the top line there. It goes up to past 200. The bottom line doesn't go past 5. If you were to split these out and actually plot them separately, this is what it would look like. That's what that bottom line actually looks like. That's not flat at all. It got flattened because you plotted it, or this person plotted it with a line that goes up to the hundreds, whereas this line doesn't even go past 5. Depending on what you're measuring, that might matter a lot. Like if that's the variation in a machine, you might want to know that. It might be really different than looking at that flat line. So that's a mistake that people make. And this is from a really great book called Creating More Effective Graphs, by the way. The book has like soared in price, oddly. So if it's really expensive, don't, I'm not encouraging anyone to buy it. It used to be like $20, but she got really popular. I don't know if that caused the book sale or price to go up. Let's do another one. What about this one? What might be a potential issue with this? Somebody other than Joe, maybe too. Not that I don't love your answers, Joe. I know Devin's been pretty active too. Anybody else want to take a guess? We have Donald, Eric. I can't see anybody else's names. These are tough though, I understand. No guesses?
I was going to say it should be a line chart and not that type of chart to what you're trying to show.
Yeah, or the main thing there is it's a two-dimensional representation of something that's really one-dimensional. 20, 21 and a half, 23, that's a one-dimensional change. And you might think, well, what's the big deal? I'm showing this in 2 dimensions, but who cares? you could really be misleading someone to think that in this case, there's exponential increases in earnings. But if you were to plot this properly as a line or a bar chart or something that truly is a one-dimensional representation, it doesn't look quite as dramatic. So things like that, like there's really no reason to plot things in 2 dimensions that are one-dimensional. Like area charts are another example of that. It's really hard to argue for what that other part of the area means because it doesn't really mean anything. Great. And I'll take this one. You know, I don't like these very much either. And people have fought with me over this, so I'm happy to hear pushback. But there's a couple issues with putting a line over a bar chart, especially if the x-axis is not time. Line charts are almost exclusively for time, marching time on the x-axis, like 7 a.m., 8 a.m., 9 a.m., January 1st, January 2nd, January 3rd. Here, we've got the fictional characters from The Office, Jim, Dwight, Michael, and Pam. They're not dates. So that's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is these are on tremendously different scales. One of them is in the tens of thousands on the right. The other one only goes up to 700. But when you plot them as if they're on the same scale, it kind of becomes a little bit misleading. Like, for example, if you look at Dwight, it looks like his line ends a little bit below the bar. And by the way, we don't know which one's which, right? There's no way to tell just from looking at this which axis is for the bar and which one's for the line. The person didn't label it, and people usually don't. And even if you do label it, it's not ideal to put like bar chart on one axis. But let's just say that the line is in the tens of thousands on the right, and the bar is on the hundreds on the left. Well, it looks like that line is less than the bar. But we know that the line is way higher. The value is way higher than the bar, right? The line value here is what, 15,000? The bar value here is 525. So, but when someone glances at that, if they didn't pay attention to the axes, they might say, oh, the line is below the bar, so it must be slightly less. But it's not a real comparison. You know, it's like not a fair comparison. So I see these all the time, and I do think they kind of mislead and confuse people, and they're not great. Alrighty, that's all I had. I like I said, I want to leave time for questions and give us some time. I do have some resources and extra stuff at the end if we want to go over a couple more things, but I'll stop here and I have my information here. I'll send this out, I guess, via email, Joe. Is that how I can send out?
That would be great if you send it out email. I mean, I could send it out along with the recording.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll be able to post a recording somewhere as well.
Okay, great. So we'll do that. Does anybody have questions about anything at all?
I've got a couple questions. What's the difference between data science and data analytics?
Oh, that's a great question. I get that question all the time. So data analytics is kind of like a little bit of a lower level of data science, not like worse, just like not as involved, not as heavy statistical processes. Like in order to be a data analyst, you do need to know like Excel and SQL and general knowledge of math and statistics, but that's usually about it. If you want to be a data scientist, it's a long, hard road. You need Python or R, which are full-blown programming languages, very hard to learn. You need much more knowledge of statistics, knowledge of machine learning algorithms, like artificial intelligence stuff, different programs. So it's a lot more involved to do a data science project than it is a data analytics project. For most companies, the data analytics is usually good enough. It's usually like really specific use cases where companies get to the point of needing data science, and people are using it more and more now too, even for smaller organizations or people who didn't use it before. But it's usually like a lot more time involved in projects, a lot harder algorithms and stuff to go through. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So part of the purpose of this manufacturing forum is an educational and training aspect. I mean, what would you recommend for employers? I mean, we've got some schools on here to, kind of just teach people the basics of data analytics and their application. You
mean like what to teach, or like actual other resources?
Yeah, just like courses. I mean, if you rent courses or subjects that, if a company wants to set up their own little data analytics shop or start flirting with it a little bit, we want to train our employees on it. What are some, courses or subjects they should, emphasize?
Gotcha. Okay, if they're like on the much smaller end, definitely starting with spreadsheets, or if they're just doing basic analytics, like, and when spreadsheets, I mean like Excel, possibly Google Sheets. It's not as good as Excel in terms of like analytics. So usually it's Excel that people are learning. The next step after that, especially if they have a SQL database or are planning on getting one, is SQL. That is a language, like you said, stands for Structured Query Language. It's not as hard as Python or R, though. It's an easier language to learn, so it's not quite as, it's hard. I'm not saying it's easy, but less of a hurdle than Python or R. People are always like, oh, should I go straight to Python? And I'm like, no, I don't think you should do that. I think that Python comes in later when you kind of hit, again, the wall, as I like to put it, for Excel and the other tools that you have, because you will eventually hit a wall with Excel, whether it's literally Excel is stopping you from opening it because it exceeds Excel's row limit, which is like 1,048,000 some rows, or you're just trying to do harder things, and Excel is not good for much more difficult things. Like, again, if it's like machine learning or even like certain charts and certain tasks or tests that you want to do a little bit harder in Excel. So that Python is usually a next step. People always ask me about Tableau and Power BI too, which are like point and click tools still, like Excel. There's no coding involved. You can, but you don't have to, but they're a step above Excel. So like they will do more than Excel, especially like really good mapping and stuff like that. So that would probably be an intermediate step too. Like if an organization is saying, I'm hitting the wall with Excel, I want to go further, but I'm not ready to invest in my employees to learn Python, which again is it's a big commitment to learn Python. Power BI and Tableau, I think, are good intermediate steps. I get paid by neither, obviously, so I'm being honest when I say I think Tableau is better. I think it's a superior product. Power BI has a lot of problems, but Power BI is significantly cheaper. So it depends on, you know, what you're looking for. But yeah, did that answer the question of like the progression a company would go in terms of training?
Yeah, definitely. That was really good. Thank you.
Great. Anybody else have questions? I'll have to give you my personal LinkedIn as well. I realize now I didn't put it on there.
I had a question and I can't remember it, but if it comes to mind, I'll email you. Oh, wait, it came to mind. How often should you be looking at your data?
Oh,
What
that's
would you
great.
recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously more the merrier, but I know that's not realistic for a lot of organizations. So I guess it depends on what you're going for. Like if it's social media data, for example, I think once a week or every other week is like fine. You're probably not going to see anything too drastically different, especially if your organization is kind of churning out the same number of social media posts. If it's a marketing campaign, let's say a marketing campaign just ended, like you put up a billboard or with a special phone number or something, you're going to look at that once and then probably not again, unless you're trying to compare it to another campaign that you're running in the future. If it's like something critical, right, like related to a machine that needs to function or else you're going to be in big trouble, then of course you're going to look at that all the time, or have an automatic thing that flags you, hey, this KPI, which stands for key performance indicator, like critical metric, has fallen below this critical level. And they have a lot of systems out there, and we've done this for people too, where we'll create like an automatic email that will hit their inbox if something is going drastically wrong. And it'll say, hey, this number just hit this like critically low point. You need to go look at the data like right now. So yeah, I think it totally depends on the application, but for things that aren't changing very often, right? I guess it doesn't really make sense to look daily, but I don't think people look enough generally. That makes sense too.
Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else? I hope that kind of the presentation kind of walked through the flow of, you know, typical analytics and problems encountered. That was the goal.
No, I think it was really good, very helpful. Really got me thinking.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Great. Well, I guess, I don't know, Joe, what you want to do. If nobody has any other questions, and I haven't been looking at the chat. I don't know if people have been putting it in the chat, although calling out on microphone is preferred. No, I don't see any. Yeah, I don't mind, you know, wrapping up early, and I can send out all the information to you, and then you can distribute.
Yeah, why don't you do that? Send me out the information, send me your slides, and I'll disseminate to everyone that was invited, and maybe we can even put it on the ACEA website there, Max. We'll talk about that.
Okay.
As I'm looking for a home for the Manufacturing Engineering Forum virtually, maybe we could temporarily house things there.
Oh, good. Great. So yeah, I guess last call and no questions. Everybody's good?
Great. Well, thanks so much for tuning in, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good one.